You're listening to a 3CR podcast recorded in a 3CR community radio studio in Melbourne, Australia. If you like what you hear, please consider donating or subscribing so we can keep bringing you more independent community content. For more information, go to 3cr.org.au.
Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. And a warning that this episode of Doin Time contains audio images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have died and graphic discussion of deaths in custody and massacres. This is Marisa and I will be with you for the next hour. First up on the show, we will speak with Ian Rintel from the Refugee Action Coalition, who will give updates on hundreds of asylum seekers who have been protesting 24/7 at the electric office of Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke. These asylum seekers have taken to the streets with a rally and march for permanent visas. Then we will bring you an interview with Keiran, First Nations activist and president for the Black People's Union, and he will give updates about campaigns and also talk about a brand new show that he has begun at 3CR. And we've had Keiran quite a few times on the show as a very honoured guest. And then after that, we will hear from Boe Spearim, First Nations activist and podcaster, about his series on massacres and the frontier wars, and also talk about upcoming Invasion Day. And both Keiran and Boe will talk about in full what lands they're from when they come onto the show. But we will now bring you an interview with Ian shortly.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
Hi, it's Nasser Mashni from Palestine Remembered, Australia's only dedicated show on Palestine. Join me every Saturday morning at 9:30 and very importantly, get along to our rallies. Sunday, 12 o'clock, State Library. Join us.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
And in case you've just tuned in, this is the Doin Time show, and we'll be speaking very shortly with Ian Rintel. After 100 days of protest, refugees have rallied and marched once again for permanent visas after a very, very long and tough encampment. Hello, Ian. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, hi, Marisa.
Lovely to have you. Now, we haven't had you on for a while, have we? It's been
a little while, yes. I've sometimes had difficulty meeting your demanding schedule.
Ian, yeah, look, there's been a lot going on. Could you just put listeners in context, and in case there's new listeners that have tuned in and don't know too much about it, can you just give us some background and also some updates about what's going on?
Yeah, no, sure. Look, the encampment in outside Burke's office in Sydney, it's now 105 days today. But they celebrated the 100th day, on the 13th of November. We had the protest rally and march on Saturday, Sorry, it was on Sunday. But people, are very determined to maintain the encampment until we get a definite answer from the government that there is a pathway to permanent visas for it's around 10,000 people when you include all those who were failed under the fast-track system and the 1,000-odd people who were brought from Manus and Nauru who are also on temporary bridging visas and need permanency. But in particular, and people in Victoria would know, the protests at Dockland, they marked their 100th day demonstration down, the 100th day of encampment down there, and ended the encampment in Melbourne. But people are protesting in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in Perth. The protests outside Jim Chalmers' office are still happening in Brisbane. And as I said, the encampment, the 24/7 protest is still happening outside Burke's office, and it's because we haven't got that guarantee yet. The Labor Party has recognised that fast track was a failed system. 96% of Bangladeshis who were processed under fast track were failed. It was around 86% for Tamils. So the Tamils, the Bangladeshis, the Iranians, Iraqis, Pakistanis, have all been failed under the fast track system. It was a very flawed system, but the government has got rid of fast track, but it has not put any process in place to ensure that the people who were the victims of fast track get permanent visas. So people are very determined to continue the protest. There's actually people in Canberra of today, tomorrow, Wednesday, protesting, and in Canberra, there's delegations seeing a range of Labor Party and crossbench politicians to try and get the word across to them. Labor came to power with a lot of the promises about what it was going to do for the people on TPVs, the people who failed by fast track. That most of the TPVs, not all of them met, have now got permanent visas, but fast track, there's nothing in place. That has to change.
What a disgrace, Ian.
Look, it is, and it's impossible to go over the misery that it's created. I mean, we've had, the fact that people don't have study visas. I've met people at university, kids of, there were kids when they came, or the kids, are now, enrolling in university. We're still getting situations where those people refugee kids are being pulled out of universities and told they cannot study because they turn 18, they don't have study rights, and so whether they pay fees or not, they are not allowed to study. All the things, people can't travel. So many of them have seen, family, immediate family of mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters actually die and not be able to travel, to be with them, to see them. You've got wives and children that are separated. I spoke to a guy, yesterday, 11 years now, almost 12 years, he's been separated from his wife and daughter. They've had to move around to try to find, some safety. In his case, was in Bangladesh. It's impossible to describe the misery. People are seeing their families break down. Every 6 months they have to do reapplications for bridging visas. They've paid more tax than many of the big corporations in Australia, but there's still no pathway in place for them.
Nothing at all. And in fact, I have interviewed on this show also Renuga and also from the Tamil Council, and also Nadez, the Iranian refugee. Yes. From Victoria, and it's just been heartbreaking listening to some of the dire consequences that have happened as a result of the fast track system. Yes,
look, it's impossible to explain this here. I'm sure Renuga and Nuggets would have done a very, very good job. They're very, very aware personally of what the consequences of fast track is. And it is just unbelievable. I mean, the Labor Party talks about the mess that the Liberals created. It's true, there was a mess when Labor got elected. They were a part of creating it. 2 years on, we're very close to the next election. It's Labor's mess now to clean up. This could have been rectified when they were elected. They recognised there was a problem with the Labor Party policy document from 2 years before, that the abolition of fast track. They very quickly gave Keiran noticed a Wheeler family gave them permanent visas. They knew that there were, 10,000 other people in exactly the same situation. But here we are in, November 2024, still trying to get something, definite and guaranteed from the Labor government. So, people are very determined. The numbers might be down a little bit. It's been a long time, 100 days plus, to be doing 24/7 outside, Burke's office. But, they're very determined to continue.
Absolutely. And I believe there was also a rally, I think it was at Anthony Albanese's office, electorate office.
Yes. So at the same time, and prior to the rally at Burke's office, more than 100 actually. Very, very lively restricting march from Anthony Albanese's office to Burke's office to make the point, that it's not simply Tony Burke. It's a Labor government. Anthony Albanese has got responsibility for this. He talks about sort of no one being left behind, but there's thousands in terms of the refugees, there's thousands. We won't talk about the thousands of others have been left behind for one reason or another. But it's the fast-track refugees. It's very clear that they have been left behind, and so it's Anthony Albanese can't keep talking about sort of Labor's no one held back and no one left behind. They are being held back and they are being left behind.
Absolutely. So is there anything coming up, Ian, that you want to let listeners know? How can listeners, what can they do to help?
Look, there are going to be protests. I haven't got them right in front of me, Marisa, but there are going to be protests in Melbourne. The Refugee Action Collective down there is still organising things around the question of permanent visas. One thing I could let people know about, there's another bill which is going into Parliament to flow on from the High Court abolishing indefinite detention and the Labor government trying to introduce legislation back into Parliament to recreate the circumstances of them, being able to hold people indefinitely or to deport them. And actually, at the moment, it also includes the fast-track victims, because the legislation the government through the Migration Amendment Bill will actually give the minister power to pay another country, for example, Nauru, to take people who are on bridging visas, on temporary visas. And once they had the okay from Nauru, say, to accept that particular person, the government would be able to detain and deport them. So it's an astounding piece of legislation. It's one of those things that it's the government is simply following the attacks that made them instead of doing something about indefinite detention, taking the principal position, recognising it should be abolished. There shouldn't be any discriminatory legislation in Australia where you discriminate against people just and non-citizens. But Labor is trying to push that bill. They've introduced the bill. It may be coming into Parliament. There's only 2 more weeks, this week and next week, parliamentary sittings, so people should be aware about that. And there may be there's already phone banking, contacting Labor members and prospectors to alert them. But it'd be another horrific piece of legislation if the government's successful getting it through. Absolutely horrific. And in fact, in the lead up to these 2 weeks in Parliament with that bill, that possible bill, basically I interviewed Laura from the Human Rights Law Centre last week about this very topic, about the legal challenge. Great. Okay. Well, the listeners already across the No, but this is fantastic. That this is a very powerful reminder, Ian, about this. That it is terribly important, and in fact, scrapping the unfair fast-track system, there's still no pathway to permanent residency, is there? Can you comment on that? Well, that's the big problem. The government could do it so easily as they did it with the Biloela family, but you've got enormous inconsistencies, and we've not seen the government do anything about that. They've said that they're concerned, but the fact is you've still got people who are just on expired visas who've not been able to get even valid bridging visas. You've got some people who've got work rights, some people haven't got work rights, some people got access to Medicare. Other people haven't got access to Medicare. None of them have got study rights on those temporary visas. So the not having the permanent visas is creating a huge amount of misery. They're people who have been living in Australia for 11 years, 12 years. They through the pandemic. They were part of the heroes of the pandemic. The community relied on them, so much, but there is no indication yet from Labor that they're going to, do the right thing. And, they've, like I said, they've recognised it's a problem, they've recognised it's a flawed system, they've abolished fast track, but the victims of fast track are still waiting for justice and waiting for that, for that pathway, which would give them some certainty and some security.
Yeah, and in fact, as I've been saying all along on this show for many weeks now, they've been living and working in Australia, but have been left without security on temporary visas.
Yeah,
11 years or longer.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, it's difficult to describe that, but every 6 months they have to renew the visa. Every 6 months, some of the people who have Medicare, if they don't get that visa renewed in time, their Medicare lapses, and then it can take up to 3 months to try and get back onto Medicare. By the time you get back onto Medicare, your visa expires 3 months after. It's a mental and bureaucratic torture, that they're involved in, and with all the uncertainty of their families, of being able to work, of not knowing what's happening. For example, I mean, we've actually found in Sydney alone, we've actually found 29 unaccompanied minors who are victims of fast track. We're now in the process of actually trying to get ministerials to actually put it to the government. You want to do something, you say you want to do something, you recognise the problem of fast track. Here's 29 unaccompanied minors who were minors when they came here in 2011, 2012, 2013. Process them, give them visas.
Absolutely. Ian, thank you so much for coming onto the program. And look, it's just that time of year. We're all feeling a bit run down, I think, at this time.
It's been a big year, and a big year still to come. So yeah,
it's going to get worse, I think.
Yeah, you've got an action-packed program there, Marisa. So good luck with the rest of it. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Ian. Take care.
Okay. Yeah. Bye for now.
Bye.
Disasters like flood, fire and extreme heat can have a significant impact on people's lives. Community legal centres help people experiencing challenges posed by climate change and disasters to access the resources and support they need. Disasters can lead to a range of problems such as damage to your home, poor conditions with your rental home, difficulty getting insurance, issues within families, at work and with Centrelink payments. Community legal centres can be found across Victoria and can provide help if you've been affected by a disaster. To find a community legal centre near you, visit the Federation of Community Legal Centres website at fclc.org.au. You can also contact Disaster Legal Help Victoria on 1800 113 432 and go to its website for helpful information at disasterlegalhelp.org.au. The Federation of Community Legal Centres is a 3CR supporter.
The rebel miners waited for whatever lay in store, and on one December morning in 1854, the redcoats attacked the camp. Dozens there would fall.
Can't make the Eureka celebrations in Ballarat? Don't despair. 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. on Tuesday, the 3rd of December, the dawn ceremony hosted by Reclaim the Radical Spirit of the Eureka Rebellion Group and Ballarat Trades Hall will be broadcast live on Community Radio 3CR.
In this curse they swore an oath beneath the Southern Cross. They'd stand together and break the license laws. From 20 different nations they gathered here as one in Ballarat beneath the southern sun.
You might have heard about the Community Radio Plus app, but it's only when you start using it that you'll wonder how you lived without it.
You can listen to us wherever you are, at home, work, driving,
on public transport, gardening, protesting, or even in the bath.
Just search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
Hi, this is Shirley Hood. Brr. You're invited to the 2024 Beyond the Bars CD launch on Thursday, the 21st of November at the During Centre behind the Collingwood Town Hall. I'll be there as MC for an evening of talks and music, including a panel discussion with some of our deadly broadcasters and live music with our deadly Bart Willoughby. Thursday, the 21st of November, the During Centre. That's behind the Collingwood Town Hall, 6:30pm until 8:30pm. Put this in your diary. Free CDs, snacks and drinks provided. All welcome, so I'll see you there. Brr.
And what a beautiful announcement that was for the Beyond the Bars panel on Thursday night. And we're back with the Doin Time show, and it's approximately 4:21. And I'd like to welcome Keiran, First Nations activist and president of the Black People's Union. Hi, Keiran, welcome.
Hey, how you going?
Good, thanks. Last time I saw we did an interview, I think we did an interview with Uncle Coco and about unwelcoming the king.
Yeah, that was right, yeah.
Tell me, just for the purposes, just in case new listeners have tuned in, can you just let us know what land you're on? What land you belong to?
Yeah, so I'm a proud traditional owner of Wani-Wundian country, which is up in the Yuin Nation, on the south coast of what's now known as New South Wales. But for the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been based down in Naarm here.
Beautiful. So, Keiran, tell us what's been going on. I believe that there's a brand new show that you've got on 3CR, and I think it would be really amazing if you could talk about that for a very powerful reason, simply because we do have some listenership in prison as well, and it would be great, for the listeners here, including the elders, to hear what show you've got and when it is.
Yeah, no, so, I've just started a new show. Last Wednesday was my first program. It's going to be every Wednesday from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock. The show's called Yilliman, which in my language means spearhead. And the idea behind the name is that the show would be somewhat of a spearhead for Indigenous resistance and Indigenous news. Talking a lot about the history of our politics and of our resistance, as well as what's happening today, not just here in Naarm as well, but right across the continent, as well as reaching out to other First Nations siblings from other colonies across the world as well. So, touching base with people from Turtle Island, as well as our closest neighbours, people from West Papua and Kanaki and other similar places like that. The idea behind the show is just really to, I suppose, on the one hand, talk about current events and, current issues that are happening, as well as talk a bit about the history and the struggle and the resistance that has been happening for 250 years on this continent and just as long, if not longer, on other continents. But also by talking about this stuff, to try and challenge people's, concepts and, how people identify and how people view themselves and their role within this here Australian colony.
Okay, tell us more about that policy.
Oh, sorry, I missed that last bit.
Did you just say policy?
Oh, no, sorry, like identity and stuff like that, and people's role within the colony itself, like the Australian colony.
Yeah, sorry, I'm doing the show from home and the connection is just a bit weird. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. My phone's doesn't have a great connection at the moment either.
Tell me that last bit again.
Essentially by talking about and exploring stuff like resistance and political history, the idea is that listeners would start to challenge their own concepts of, how they identify. Do people call themselves Australian, and why do people see themselves as an Australian when, Australia's only been around for 123 odd years since it was federated, and 97% of the population of this continent have been here for only a couple of generations at most. And, people have a lot of rich history and culture and heritage from where their families originally came from, but a lot of people, disregard that and, get rid of that and instead adopt this kind of Australian identity. But it's about really exploring, what is an Australian identity? What does that mean? How does that fit in with colonisation? How does it fit in with, the ongoing occupation here and the genocide here, as well as genocide across the world? And just, really trying to get people to challenge, how they view themselves and their role in the world.
That's exactly right, because, one of the things that I was thinking about just when you were talking was really looking at the very ugly history around missions and stolen generation and also the White Australia policy as well.
Yeah, and, there's a lot of this history as well isn't really known much by the mainstream. And, even within our own, First Nations communities, a lot of this history isn't really known or isn't really spoken about that much because so much of it has just been swept under the rugs for decades and decades now, and there's been so much propaganda and so much lies around the history of this continent. And there is so much that we have to reconcile with. There's slavery, for example, happened on this continent up until the 1970s. 150-odd years after they abolished slavery in America, it was still continuing here on this continent. But we don't talk about stuff like that. We don't reconcile stuff like that. We don't even acknowledge that slavery happened here. Instead, we call it stolen wages. You know what I mean? And, same as you just mentioned with the missions, people don't really talk about the impact that missions and reserves had on our people. They don't talk about, they don't contextualise exactly how atrocious this stuff was. At the end of the day, quite a lot of our missions and reserves operated in similar fashion to Nazi concentration camps back in Germany under the Nazis' rule. You know what I mean? But people don't think about the concentration camps that happened here. They don't think about the slavery from here. They don't think about the fact that 98% of the population here was genocided. One of the biggest ethnic cleansing that the world's ever seen.
Exactly, and I think one of the things that I try and really talk about on this show is the fact that history is still repeating itself. I've interviewed so many young Aboriginal people who are affected and traumatised by the missions in the past because their parents were brought up on missions. So, of course, that transgenerational trauma is going to come back down.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's not just the stuff from the past as well. This is another thing as well. Quite often a lot of these traumatic experiences from the past are still actually happening today. Like when we look at the stolen generations, for example, today places like the Victorian state government are removing more Aboriginal children from their families than at any point during the official stolen generation policies of the 1900s. You know what I mean? That's still very much occurring today. And, you look at our mass incarceration rates. Our incarceration rates go up every single year. And we've been the most incarcerated people for literally decades now, but it gets worse and worse every year. And, these are still ongoing traumatic acts of genocide and colonisation.
Definitely so. And I'm really glad to know you, Keiran, and I'm so happy that you're doing the show. It's great to have a yarn with you. And I'm going to be interviewing pretty soon Boe Spearim from Brisbane soon to talk about massacres and frontier wars. So he'll be coming up next after you. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the mining of Aboriginal land. What can you comment on that?
That's a massive topic in itself, but at the end of the day, it's something. It's something that is still, again, very much tied into that colonisation. Very much tied into our resource theft. At the end of the day, that's what it is when we're an unceded people and we haven't signed any treaties or truces or surrenders. We haven't got any bill of sale for our land. When people are taking the natural resources, it's theft. Our natural resources are still being stolen in this ongoing act of colonisation. But there's so much more tied to it than just that. when we look at resource theft, we also see stuff like, the absolute destruction of so many of our sacred sites that are, some of them, tens of thousands of years old. These are sites that are older than any site that exists in Europe anywhere, and these places get blown up so that, some billion-dollar company can continue to go in and make billions more in profits. That's not done for the working class. It's not done for anybody except for some billionaires' profits. And, we're still seeing stuff like displacement of our communities. We're seeing governments in Western Australia and the Northern Territory doing stuff like withdrawing services and support to remote Aboriginal communities so that those communities have no choice but to leave their lands in search of, basic necessities like food and medicine and opportunities. And then as a result of them leaving their land, you get these mining companies that come through and then just absolutely strip the place bare, pocket billions of dollars in resources. Meanwhile, our people still remain the most impoverished people on this continent. Never mind the fact that by right, all of these natural resources and minerals should be ours. We are still the most poorest people on this continent, while other people make billions of dollars. But actually, just on mining, I've got a really interesting thing to just quickly touch on. I was having a yarn the other day to another BPU member, Jasper, and he was telling me about this research he was doing. Now, I've forgotten the mining company, but if people go on Google it, I'm sure they'll be able to find which mining company it was. But there was actually a mining company, right, up in the Northern Territory that was doing this. It's really hard to explain. Long story short, right, they were making these documentaries up in the Northern Territory about Aboriginal sacred sites and Aboriginal culture, right? But that was all just to be guys, and what they were actually doing is they were moving all of these people out of these areas so that they could set up, these big, what are they called, the big, scenes where they film stuff, sets, that's it. So they could set up big movie sets, right, out in the desert. And in these movie sets, they had all this mining equipment. And then it turns out that they actually weren't out there filming a documentary and that the mining equipment wasn't there as a prop. They were just pretending to be out there filming a movie, and meanwhile they were out there stripping natural resources.
Oh, my... When?
This happened, I think, in the early 2000s, in the late 90s.
Oh, my... See, I'm not surprised, to be honest.
Yeah, this is how insidious this colony is, and how underhanded and manipulative and, just sinister, outright dirty in their tactics.
Yeah, look, there's just so much to talk about. I mean...
Yeah. I think it was Shell, actually, or it was another one of those petroleum companies. But, yeah, it's such dodgy behaviour.
It's really dodgy behaviour, and it's, when we've got more time, I'd love to chat to you sometime about that on and off air, because and even the royalties, this stuff about royalties, that doesn't sit well with me either, the fact that Aboriginal people are not being given royalties, but even when they are, in many ways Aboriginal people are enslaved, because even though they're given royalties, their land is still taken, it's still being mined.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at the royalties as well, and quite often it's scraps, it's, less than 1% of the profits that are being made. And quite often as well, these royalties aren't given to the community, they're given to, select individuals within the community who are willing to sell out their community to, green light and tick off the boxes on some mining permits.
I'm so glad that you said that, because, there's so many things that I've witnessed in terms of even reading articles and interviewing people where they say that royalties are important. But I'm just glad that you've talked about that you've mentioned it.
Yeah, well, it's a massive problem. Yeah, it is. And, people think it gives such a false image to the public as well, because, people hear about these royalties and think, oh, well, the Aboriginal communities, they're getting these royalties from these billion-dollar mining ventures. They must be set, they must be getting all the stuff they need. But then when you actually dig into it, billions of dollars worth of profits, there's probably $500,000 or so paid out in royalties from those billions of dollars. We're talking about less than 1% here.
It's not much.
It's not paid to the community. It's not paid to community programs.
Correct.
It's literally given to 3 or 4 individuals to put into their own pocket.
Keiran, you can't imagine how relieved I am that we've talked about this, because, you know, I don't want to put out the impression that I begrudge people getting money, because it's not about money, it's about principle.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's about our culture and stuff as well. Like, in our culture, it was never a cultural trait of ours for one or two people to become super rich at the expense of the rest of the community. You know, our culture teaches us to share and to have equality within the community and to look after community and look after country. And these mining ventures, they don't look after country, they don't look after community. And when people are turning it into some sort of greedy venture for themselves, they're spitting in the face of our culture, really.
Exactly. Keiran, thank you so much for coming onto the program. As always, we've had a great yarn. And I'm going to be speaking with Boe really soon, and I'll probably catch you at the Beyond the Bars event Thursday night.
Yep, yeah, I'll definitely be there.
Yeah, rock up, listeners.
Yep,
thanks so much.
Sure. No worries. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM on digital and online. 3CR Radical Radio.
And I don't believe in fighting today in any one front, but on all fronts. In fact, I'm a black nationalist freedom fighter.
This country is a nation of thieves.
Now, we're never going to get justice here in these filthy racist courts here.
Our people have been massacred, and we're not supposed to grieve for that. We've got to do something more drastic if we're serious about this.
Move over, or we gonna move on over you.
Yilliman with Keiran Stewart-Assheton on 3CR dives deep into Indigenous resistance and global anti-colonial struggles. Featuring frontline activists, it confronts Australia's identity, challenges power structures and fuels revolutionary discourse. Wednesdays, 12 to 1 p.m.
And you just heard an interview with Keiran, who's First Nations activist and president of the Black People's Union, talking about a host of things, including mining of Aboriginal lands. Coming up on the show is another very much loved guest who I always enjoy talking to. And we're going to be speaking with Boe Spearim, and he does a podcast on a series on Frontier Wars. And I'm going to start off by welcoming Boe and asking him what land he's from. Hello, Boe.
Hey, how you going?
Great to have you. So can you just tell listeners, in case there's any new ones that have tuned in, let them know what land you're from?
Definitely. So, Yama, Boe Spearim, Gumma, Kuma, Marawari. My mom is from Brewarrina in Western New South Wales, and my dad is from Moree. Both of them are from reserves and missions. I was born in Western Sydney, in Blacktown. Grew up in Mount Druitt, lived in St Mary's and Katoomba, but spent the majority of my life here in Brisbane, on the Yagara country, and mainly living on the south side of Brisbane.
Okay, so we had you on, I think, during NAIDOC week, didn't we? I think that's the last time I had you on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the police and about how, you know, the way they behave around First Nations people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we saw it tonight up here in Brisbane, and in particular one, I think Ananala, actually.
Yeah.
The police came there and, I think they had a stall there and they had their paddy wagon there, and for fun they were chucking kids in the back of the paddy wagon.
That's right.
Fun for them, but, traumatising for some Aboriginal families and communities, and in particular those that have lost loved ones and family members who still fight for justice over Aboriginal deaths in custody. And, so there was a huge outpour online towards those officers who did that, and I think it was safe to say that at no NAIDOC events were there any, all that I saw anyways, any police paddy wagons there, for fun to show kids, there's a difference between, kids jumping on a fire truck and, jumping and being allowed to jump in the back of a paddy wagon. Fire the fire brigade doesn't kill people. There's a huge separation difference between those two things.
And this was during NAIDOC week, was it?
Yeah, literally during NAIDOC week. Yeah, and the theme being keep the fire burning. Black, loud, and proud. I think it was, and it definitely, wasn't the call.
Yeah, it's pretty gross, isn't it? Really.
Definitely. Always is, yeah.
Let's talk about your podcast series, because I think we do need to keep that alive. Can you tell us, what about the Frontier Wars and what your message is, and then tell listeners where to find it?
Definitely. You can find the podcast on all streaming platforms. You can find it at awesomeblack.org. You can also find it at the Courier Mail, the Aboriginal newspaper, on their website as well. There's an episode that's up on there. I'm just going to send them some more episodes to chuck up on their website as well. On all streaming platforms, yeah. That's where you can find the podcast. I've been doing it for about 4 years now.
Yep.
And each episode I learn something new and amazing and inspiring. Whether that may be, a warrior or the tactics we use or a massacre, like as heavy as these topics are, most of the time, it's definitely inspiring to keep going to find out more truths, and then also fight for, restitution, compensation, and all these other things that I believe that Aboriginal people are owed. We're the beneficiaries of oppression in this country. We see different places around the world having discussions about, reparations or, holding, different sort of colonial powers to account as well. Under international law, we're owed, the right of restitution and reparations and justice and liberation, that should be afforded to people who live in a settler colonial nation, which Australia is.
And what are the Frontier Wars exactly?
Yep. So the Frontier Wars was, as described, I guess, broadly, is a series of conflicts and events that occurred in what would be sort of the earlier exploration, formation, up until, I guess the turn of the century, from here in Australia in particular, that was roughly from 1788 up until the 1930s, maybe even 40s as well, in some areas where they were actively, participating in massacring mob, or even just the general conversation between states and territories and the federal government, which was happening in the NT. There's a great documentary called Ducking Out versus the King or versus the Crown, which describes one of the last sort of public discussions between the police up in Darwin, or the local, the territory government in Darwin and the federal government, about sending them ammunition and soldiers to go in for a punitive expedition. A nice way of saying, go in there and take care of the blacks.
Yeah.
That's an episode of the podcast as well, but there is a film based on that event. So that's sort of and what happened when we describe what Frontier Wars is. It's the massacres, it's the battles. It's that sort of earlier period of time where they're forging for progress and what do you call it, resources on one hand, and then on the other hand, ours, which is, forging to, protect our, our lands and our countries from invaders who want to, if not destroy all, and take prisoners for, personal labour, slaves and stuff, and which our people were.
Yeah. That's great. Yep. So the Frontier War Stories that you have, it's a podcast dedicated to truth-telling, isn't it, about a side of Australia that's been left out of the history books?
Definitely. And I think the reason why it's even worded in that kind of way as well is understanding when we, myself, when I went to school, it wasn't learned about, and the textbooks that we had in school never touched on those things. And I'm sure consecutive, schooling and education after I left continued to do that. In some places around Australia, like they're starting to change it, which is good.
Yeah.
But that's just one aspect of sort of what needs to happen in this country. Yeah, truth-telling is that. Accountability is another. And then, restitution and reparation also needs to happen, Aboriginal. And then it's not a matter of, I didn't commit these crimes 20 years ago. I'm 50 years old, or I'm, like whatever these rednecks say today. No, you're not the one who did that, but you definitely benefit,
exactly.
In this country off of, one, the free slave labour that Aboriginal people, were made to work in this country, but then also, at every sort of turn when, white Australia were given leases of land or, the right to buy land, that wasn't afforded to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country as well. So that was something that was denied to our people, whether it was the war veterans or even, the right to sort of own and buy land in certain...
I've got quite a few of your podcasts. I've downloaded them and I've been listening to a few of them. And I know that you've interviewed quite a few people. I think you interviewed Ray, did you?
Yeah, Ray Kirkove. Yeah, I've interviewed him a bunch of times. Ray, yeah, he's always doing some great stuff in that field. Yeah, he's good.
And you've done some stuff on Tasmania as well, haven't you?
Tasmania, looked at one of the interesting things that I found out on some of the islands off of Tasmania and some of the islands off of the east coast in the early sort of settler days, they were used as convict holding cells in prisons, penal settlement. Aboriginal people were sent there as well as other Indigenous men that were participating in the same form of frontier resistance in their own country as well. So that was something very interesting when I did the story about Tasmania and interviewing Christy Harmon, who is an amazing academic and lecturer based in Tasmania. She went and visited the islands off there and saw these engravings of, other Indigenous men, and I think in particular Māori men. She's from New Zealand herself, a white Pākehā lady, and she was astonished and amazed that this was happening, but also shocked as well, and wanted to understand and find out what was happening to Aboriginal men, if it was happening to other Indigenous men here as well. So she wrote a couple of books on called Indigenous Convicts. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, look, there's so much to look at, and of course we can't forget Lyndall Ryan, who passed away. Like, she did some really important work, including the massacre map.
Definitely. Yeah, Lyndall has been somebody who has, personally, I've had the opportunity and the grace and been very thankful to have her on my podcast, on the radio, when I was on the radio as well, having multiple chats with her, and amazing what she in her life has sort of created and her team at University of Newcastle, the massacre map, but not even that, but just all her earlier work in looking into frontier conflict in New South Wales and Tasmania, was amazing and very groundbreaking in its own right as well, and was one of those sort of leading people, along with Henry Reynolds and a few others back in the day, who was sort of really pushing that narrative of change, but also understanding of why these things are so important for people to read and to sort of learn about, and also act on it as well. Actively do something that is helping to sort of shift and change the understanding and hopefully the narrative of how Aboriginal and Torres Strait people are treated in this country.
Exactly. So tell us about Invasion Day. You were speaking off air that you're preparing for Invasion Day. It's coming up obviously in January.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good time now to sort of, put in the memory banks and also get folks ready down that way in other parts, of which I'm sure they're already, ready to sort of get things moving in regards to Invasion Day and how important, that day is for me in particular, and my family and community of Moree. It's even a more of a meaningful, special day for us because in 1839 the Mile Creek massacre happened, but a few months before that happened, Waterloo Creek, also known as Slaughterhouse Creek, took place, and that happened after battles and skirmishes between Aboriginal people and settlers in the Moree country. What was happening was Aboriginal people were resisting farmers setting up their cattle or their crops, and Aboriginal people, Moree people in particular, were burning and scaring off these farmers and settlers from the land. And so what happened was these farmers, they got in contact with the governor and they ordered, protection. And so what happened was they set up the mounted police led by Major Nunn. I think Snodgrass was there as well, another active member, and they were heavily armed with horseback. And then what happened was they pick up squatters and settlers, and they train them in how to corral and how to chase and track and kill and maim and disrupt and everything that they needed to learn in regards to dispersing and killing Aboriginal people, but in particular Gomeroi people. And so this went on for about a month, the chasing and sort of the conflict between certain groups and the settlers, and then they caught up with a bunch of Aboriginal people about 20 k's outside of Moree along a river, proceeded to trample and massacre this group of Aboriginal people and Gomeroi people. And it's said that the numbers vary from like 5 to 15 to 20 to 40 to even almost 100 people who were killed in this instance in regards to Waterloo Creek massacre or Slaughterhouse Creek massacre. So, on the 26th of January in Moree, Gomeroi people marched down the main street of Moree and with banners and placards saying, "Remember our ancestors, who fought and who died on the frontier all those years ago, 20 k's outside of Moree." So it's always a personal day for us, especially us folks living off country, and it's always good. It's always heartfelt and meaningful to acknowledge those ancestors and old people who were massacred on that day all those years ago as well. Yeah, so
Yeah, for sure.
And then, today it's always good to, remind people of what is happening and how important it is to, get back out on the streets and continue to support Aboriginal people, especially now. If anything, the referendum just showed us, continued to shine light on how horrible and how racist this country is. Not that we needed a vote to sort of show us, how growing this country is, and also orchestrate, a campaign that was led, by Aboriginal people who openly support, the illegal occupation of Palestine and openly support Zionists, and also a campaign that is run by Zionists as well.
Exactly, Bo.
The think child of the think brain behind these campaigns.
That's right. We have beaten a record. We are just about to the end of our show. We've got about a minute left. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. As always, I love yarning with you, brother.
You have a good one, and thanks, Nat, and hope the rest of the shows for the end of the year are great.
Good on you, mate. Thanks a lot.
Good. Cheers. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
So it's up to us, the people. We need a treaty in this country. We need the end to the war in this country. And the only way we can do that is through a peace treaty. Not the one you see in Victoria, not the one you see in Queensland, not the one you see in the Northern Territory, because they talk treaty and still lock our people up. They still kill our people. They still desecrate our land and our water. A treaty means peace. A treaty means equality. And a treaty means justice. Thank you.
You're listening to Radical Radio on 3CR, 855 on your AM dial, 3CR digital, and podcasting and streaming on 3cr.org.au.
Of another show, the Doin Time show, and it's goodbye from Marisa. Stay tuned every Monday 4 to 5 for the Doin Time show. Bye.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.